Good afternoon. As some of you might know, I am working in Bible translation. And quite often, we stumble across very interesting verses, like this verse regarding Issachar. This is the passage where Jacob is blessing all his sons. He called them together, and he blesses each of them with a very specific blessing. And he's calling Issachar a stubborn donkey. Let us see what's happening here. Let me step one step back. Who doesn't feel refreshed after a time in the countryside? You looked all over the mountains or the fields, and you just come back home and you feel, wow, I can live again. I can do my job again. And that is more or less what Issachar is feeling. The biblical theme of taking a rest comes to us through a stubborn donkey image. And this stubborn donkey is Issachar, as I have just said. But like all of us, there's always a twist. It's like a snag, a catch-22. Let's listen, let's read what the Bible is saying about Issachar, the stubborn donkey who saw the beauty of the land. Jacob gives a very personalized blessing to each of his sons. In Genesis 49, Jacob is blessing his sons, each with a very specific tailor-made blessing. And since it is a blessing of what would come, it is like a prophecy. And knowing his sons, he actually prophesies over them what they will be, how they will be. So please turn with me to Genesis 49. We're going to read only two verses, verse 14 and 15, regarding Issachar. So Issachar, he is like a stubborn donkey. That's what his dad is saying. His dad knows him. I'm reading firstly then. I will read quite a few translations, but firstly I will read New King James Version. Genesis 49, verse 14 and 15. Issachar is a strong donkey, lying between two burdens. He saw the rest was good, and that the land was pleasant. He bowed his shoulder to bear a burden, and became a band of slaves. Yes, what does that mean? Does that mean anything to you? Does it say anything to you? So what will happen to him? Will he become a band of slaves, or have a band of slaves, or what does it mean? Let us look at the New American Standard Version. Verse 14, 15. Issachar is a strong donkey, lying between the sheepfolds. When he saw that the resting place was good, and that the land was pleasant, he bowed his shoulder to carry burdens and become a slave at enforced labor. So what does that mean? Quite a few differences on there. Firstly, in verse 14 says, Issachar is a strong donkey. Here it's actually saying the same. And then the next line, lying down between two burdens. In NASB, lying between the sheepfolds. Why is that so different? And then right at the end, he bowed down his shoulder and carried burdens and became a slave at forced labor. So here it's definitely clear that he will do the forced labor. In the New King James Version, it is not so clear whether he will be the laborer or he will have a band of slaves. Let us continue and see what the other translations say. I'm going to read the King James Version here. Genesis 49, verse 14 and 15. Issachar is a strong ass, couching down between two burdens. And he saw that the rest was good, and the land that it was pleasant, and bowed his shoulder to bear, and became a servant unto tribute. Well, also a little bit different. In verse 14, I was wondering whether he fell down as a donkey, being laden too heavily by these burdens, or was he stubborn and therefore lie down and didn't want to go down further? And by refusing to go further, you realize, wow, the rest is actually quite good. So it's actually quite interesting and difficult to understand exactly what this text means. And here, at the end of verse 15, he became a servant unto tribute. So what does that happen? Because he didn't want to work, was forced, and now he had to work even more and pay some tribute. I don't know what it means. The NIV, let's turn to the NIV. Genesis 49, verse 14 and 15 in the NIV. Issachar is a raw-boned donkey lying down among the sheep pens. When he sees how good is his resting place and how pleasant is his land, he will bend his shoulder to the burden and submit to forced labor. Interesting. Here it's spoken of his land and his resting place, but then submit to forced labor. How does that logically connect? Here also it says he's a raw-boned donkey. Interesting, in the Hebrew, it's like he's a bony donkey. What does that mean? But I think it means he has a strong bone structure and therefore a strong donkey, but maybe also a little bit stubborn. It's difficult sometimes to understand. And therefore, I want to say it's easy to translate, but difficult to translate meaningfully. Difficult to translate with meaning. You've seen all these translations. They've all translated, and it's not so difficult to translate the words, but what does it actually mean? And can we put meaning into the translation by just making explicit what's inside there? So how do all these parts connect to each other in a logical way? So these are the things that are mentioned there. He saw the refreshing resting place. He loaded up more heavy burdens, and he became a slave. This is verse 15. After he saw the resting place, that it was good, the land was good, and now these three things are important. He saw the resting, he saw the refreshing resting place. He loaded up more heavy burdens, and he became a slave. Let us look at the Hebrew. In verse 14, that word for resting place or saddle sacks or two burdens is mishpatayim. It seems to me we do not know very well what that means. But nowadays, I would say 90% of all the translations, they go for the place of resting, the sheep pen, a place where they can rest and are allowed to rest that is safe. So that's the most common translation nowadays, most common understanding of this word. The older translations have something like between the saddle sacks. In other words, the donkey just went down and he rested between his saddle sacks. But what is common in all these understandings is that this is a place of resting, a place of refreshing. In verse 15, he saw that the resting place was good. Menucha. Now, it relates to the word Noah in Genesis. Noah means to rest. So this menucha, the place of rest, was tov. It was good. So he saw the resting place was good. But he saw something else. He experienced something else, I should rather say. He experienced that the Eretz, was pleasant. The Ummah was pleasant. So in what sense was the land pleasant? Was it good ground, good soil, or what was pleasant? I think he experienced the total rest there. maybe nature, maybe the countryside, maybe the scenery, but that word aretz there, haaretz, can mean all of these. That the country, the land, the place was good. It was refreshing. It was pleasant. That he experienced there. And then he bowed down to upload a heavy burden. Lisboel. Lisboel. Le is to, sabal is to load up. So Lisboel, to load up a heavy burden. So how does that connect? And then with the result of, by he, the most with it, he became a bound, somebody that was bound, maybe by chains or whatever, servant or slave. So he loaded up these things and he became a bound slave, a forced slave. So therefore, all these translations do seem to be correct in some way or another, but what does it mean? And after I had to struggle with all these, it actually spoke to me very strongly, because I have a certain problem that I will just lift out for you as well. So Issachar, being a stubborn, strong donkey, he kept working, but one day when he rested here in the countryside, he realized, wow, this resting place is a good place. And he was pleasantly surprised. He felt how pleasant it was to look at the land, the country there, the countryside, the landscape. And then, and this is how I would like to connect it, and therefore, he was willing to work hard in order to get to that, to get that. So he bowed down and uploaded heavy burdens, and he even made himself a slave to get to the resting place in the end. So he saw how good it was to rest, and he made himself a slave by working very hard. He enslaved himself in order to get to that resting place. So this is my interpretation of connecting all these. The New Living Translation, NLT, is quite close to that. Let us read that as well. Genesis 49, 14 and 15 in the NLT. Issachar is a sturdy donkey, resting between two saddle sacks. It's interesting they went back to the saddle sacks. I would rather prefer the sheep pens. I think that's more correct. When he sees how good the countryside is, here they are actually using that word that I said, the country, haaretz, and how pleasant the land, he will bend his shoulder to the load and submit himself to hard labor. You see, when he realized how good it was to rest there in the countryside, now he's willing to work hard and load a big load on his shoulders to work hard. Make himself a laborer, a forced laborer, a slave to himself and his ideals, his dreams, in order to get to the resting place. I hope you agree with me. If you don't, please contact me. You're welcome. Write a comment. And let us try and understand what the Word of God is actually telling us. Let us finish up here and see how it affects us, how it touches us, how it's speaking to us. I want to finish by saying, don't be a burdened donkey. Don't be a stubborn donkey. Don't be an enslaved donkey, but be refreshed in your daily rhythm. So how do you refresh yourself daily? But also in your weekly rhythm. So like, for instance, on Sundays, what are you doing? Are you resting or are you just keep working because there's so much? I think God would like us to take a rest. Yeah, if you're a pastor, of course, it's more difficult to take a rest on Sunday, but at least I think you will have to keep this rhythm that God created in the creation for us. We have to take a day of rest. But also in your yearly rhythm, are we taking enough holidays? Or are we just working so hard like an enslaved burdened donkey and we actually never rest? Then we are stubborn as Issachar. But it seemed to me he actually worked that hard in order to come to the resting place. And of course, are you a burdened donkey in your life rhythm? In other words, if you're my age and you're thinking of retirement, how long will you keep burdening yourself, enslaving yourself till you come to the point of rest? Of course, I think we all have experienced, as I've said here in the beginning, the wonderful countryside, the wonderful resting places. But are we still just keep going and working, enslaving ourselves? Or are we actually planning for a good retirement as well? To be able to rest in that good place before we're too old and too sick and too burdened and too enslaved. May God help you, and I hope, I trust that this little story about Issachar will encourage you, refresh you as well, to think about where and how you should come to the resting place by not enslaving yourself daily, weekly, yearly, and through your whole life without actually getting to the place of rest. May God give you real rest in all of these senses. Pray that God will be with us and lead us to this wonderful place of rest that He has given us.